Participants, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to recognize and welcome to Professor Insinyur Siti Malkama, MSc, PhD, the Dean of UGM Graduate School. Good morning, Ibu. Diki Sofian, MPP, MA, PhD, the head of the organizing committee and from ICRS UGM. Good morning, Pak Diki. Respected head and deputy head of the study program of Graduate School Universitas Gadjah Mada, and also faculty members of Graduate School Universitas Gadjah Mada. Thank you very much for your presence.
Distinguished guests, respected speakers, paper presenters, participants, and ladies and gentlemen, as a start of our opening ceremony, we will sing the national anthem of the Republic of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. We would like to request to you all rise. Thank you. Please be seated.
Distinguished guests, respected speakers, paper presenters and participants, ladies and gentlemen. Now we would like to introduce the head of organizing committee of this conference, Diki Sofian, MPP, MA, PhD, and we will invite him to the podium to deliver his welcoming remarks. Dr. Diki is the Faculty of Interreligious Studies and the core doctoral faculty of Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies. Dr. Diki, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace and blessings to all of you. Shalom. Good morning to you all. It gives me great pleasure and honor to host the 12th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. I would like to especially welcome all of you who have come a long way, especially those coming outside of Yogyakarta and Indonesia. We have friends from Jakarta, from Singapore, Malaysia, the United States, Switzerland later on, inshallah, the Netherlands, the Philippines, and many other countries joining via Zoom. This year's IGSSCI, as we call it, is entitled Ethics and Accountability in Politics, Sciences, and Professions. I feel like this theme cuts across many of the fields and subfields that are in this graduate school of Universitas Gadjah Mada. It speaks volume also to the upcoming presidential elections that will occur in February 2024, which I'm sure will be quite a political festivity or a circus, depending on how you see Indonesian politics today. Quite a number of the presidential and vice presidential candidates happen to graduate from this very university. And so it is quite crucial for all of us in the academic community in Gadjah Mada to sort of see who ultimately will win the race. Now, scientific developments of late have also pointed to a number of underlying issues with respect to ethics and accountability. As we can see, the drone and missile technologies have changed the whole landscape of war and what it means to be a soldier. The recent developments in biomedical and biotechnology have also seen a surge, where the line between what is ethical and not are starting to be very unclear. Various professions, due to the recent emergence of artificial intelligence and AI-enabling technologies, have also made us ponder and wonder about the efficacy of some of these work that we are doing right now across all aspects of life. Sadly, this conference is held amid the current war in Gaza, Palestine. This is, if you can call it war, that is. Wars are normally between two armies, two navies, and two air forces. The Palestinians do not have an army, they don't possess a navy, nor an air force, much less nuclear armament. So no, it is not a war. It is a story about a brutal occupation and annexation which has been going on for the past 75 years. This was one of the reasons why I rejected an invitation earlier this year to come to Israel to celebrate its 75th anniversary based on its brutal occupation and annexation of Palestinian lands. And anyone with a mere figment of historical knowledge and geopolitical literacy would know that if you conquer a people and occupy their lands, you should expect an armed resistance, like we saw in Indonesia 70 years back. Now, many questions abound about the ethics and accountability of it all. The mass murder of almost 10,000 women, children, and non-combatants in Gaza, and the complete destruction of infrastructure, and the annihilation of the Palestinians served no purpose at all, except to make the Gaza an unlivable place, and to remove all Arab Palestinians, whether Muslims or Christians, to make way for the greater Israel project. The way I see it, Gaza represents the last bastion of humanity, the last stand against the remnants of the 20th century brute colonialism, which has been ardently and unquestioningly supported by the so-called Western democracies, which for the most part has been preaching the world about democracy, self-determination, human rights, and dignity. What I find most deafening is not the sound of the jet fighters, the mortars, the phosphorus bombs, and the tanks marching in. It is not even the cries of mothers, fathers, and the babies, which have all been seen and heard in social media and television. But what is truly deafening is the acquiescence and the unwavering and unconditional support of the apartheid state of Israel by Western powers. And here we are left with the Palestinian human animals, as the Israeli Minister of Defense calls them, currently dispossessed and living a life without rights, dignity, and future ahead of them. I feel that Gaza will go down in history as a testament to the glaring hypocrisy of Western powers and the failure of the human species to come to terms with their own prejudices and hatred of the others. Now again, where is the ethics in all of this? Where is the accountability in all of this? To me, this is the ultimate struggle. As we venture into our different pathways in life and professions, we're constantly faced by this dilemma of whether to act in good faith and in an ethical manner, or we cave in to our own desires, whims, and fancies for more money, power, and influence. As academics and people of intellect, we must make a decision between doing what is wrong or right, between what is acceptable and not. So as we all gather here in this building to share our research, I sincerely hope that we can all motivate, inspire each other to make the right kind of choices. Let us pray to the Almighty that He provides us with the correct guidance and inspiration to lead an ethical and accountable way of life. Thank you for your kind attention. Godspeed. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diki Sofyan.
And now we would like to request the present on the stage, Ibu Profesor Insinyur Siti Makamah MSc PhD, to deliver her remarks and officiate the conference.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Good morning to all of us. It is indeed my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome distinguished speakers, guests, and participants of the 12th International Graduate Students and Scholar Conference in Indonesia, IGSSCI, hosted by the Graduate School Universitas Gadjah Mada. I would like to especially welcome those coming from many places in Indonesia, also from outside Indonesia, such as Singapore, Malaysia, United States, Switzerland, Netherlands, Philippines, Germany, India, and other countries that come here, also that join us via Zoom. We do hope that the academic exchanges and sharing of scientific findings in the conference would benefit all of us here and beyond. This graduate school of Universitas Gadjah Mada, now we have 25 study programs, including 11 the PhD programs and 14 master programs. All of the study programs are interdisciplinary programs. So we have also graduate study programs in the faculties. Gadjah Mada has 18 faculties, 1 graduate school and 1 vocational school. As you know, the world is becoming increasingly complex by the day. The same is true with the state-of-the-art knowledge and scientific endeavors. Unfortunately, new scientific research, technologies, and ways of seeing, perceiving, and experiencing the world have all created much disparity, polarizations, conflicts, and war. With the recent rise of generative artificial intelligence, we are aware and anticipating the machine learning system might take over many of the jobs which have traditionally been done occupied by human beings. Breakthroughs in defense technologies, biomedicine, biotechnology have also answered in questions of ethics, morality, and accountability. This is why the main theme of this year's conference is so timely and relevant: ethics and accountability in politics, sciences, and professions. It is relevant because Indonesia will undergo, yet again, massive direct presidential elections in February 2024, and we all certainly hope and pray that the 2024 presidential election will not bring about polarization. I am indebted to various organizations that are supporting this year's conference. We have the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies, IGSSCI, the Indonesia Institute for Academic Partnerships, the Focolare Movement and Globe Ethics, based in Geneva, Switzerland. I sincerely hope all of you will have a great time together, networking with different scholars of various backgrounds. And for those from outside of Yogyakarta in Indonesia, we do wish that you will find the time to enjoy of our charming province of Yogyakarta and experience its culture and delicacies. By reciting Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I formally open this year's International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia 2023. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ibu Siti Malkama, for your kind words. And now?
And now, to make memorable moments, we would like to do a group photo, and the committee will take photograph so we can keep this wonderful moment in our lifetime. We will make 2 sessions of group photo. The first, we would like to invite to come to in front of the stage the Dean of Graduate School, Professor Siti Malkama, the Head of Organizing Committee, Dr. Diki Sofyan, and to all the main speakers. Please come to the in front of the stage. Pak Widi, please also join, Pak Widi. Pak Habib. Oh. Thank you very much. And for the second session, the committee will take a photograph to all the participants in this seminar hall. We would like to invite all of you to stand in your seat, and then the committee will take a photograph from the stage. Di depan ya. Okay, please give your best smile for the photo session. One more time, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Please be seated. As our welcome gesture to you, we would like to present the Javanese dance Golek Ayun Ayun, performed by two beautiful girls, the students of Performing Arts and Visual Art Studies, Graduate School, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Miss Dwi Yulastuti and Miss Galih Prakasiwi. Golek Ayun Ayun dance is a classical court dance from Yogyakarta. In Javanese, Golek means finding. Ayun Ayun is the name of the song or gending. Ayun comes from the word ayun, which means desire. Ayun Ayun is a reduplication word that means continuous desire. This dance represents a girl who seeks self-identity. She likes to make up and tidy up. Much movement represents that activities. In Javanese, it's called Mulyani Busono. By this dance, the girl feels sure of herself and also confidence. Distinguished guests, respected speakers, paper presenters, and participants, ladies and gentlemen, as they are ready here, let's welcome them with a big round of applause.
Thank you very much for the dance performer. What a wonderful dance. And hopefully this dance will bring to us a good spirit to do the conference during these 2 days. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the next agenda, that is main session 1, with the theme Politics, Science, and the Rise of Technocracy. We would like to invite the moderator of this session and to all the speakers to go to the main stage. The moderator will be Dr. Diki Sofyan, and the speakers will Professor Purwo Santoso from Department of Politics and Government, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Mr. Paul Hedges from RSIS Nanyang Technological University, Professor Franz Wyssen from Radboud University and ICRS, Professor Michael Northcott from Edinburgh University and ICRS, and Mr. Rusdian Lubis from Indonesian Infrastructure Finance. We kindly invite to all the speakers and moderator to the stage. Thank you. Dr. Diki, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to you all. This is the first main session of the International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. We have 5 distinguished panelists, speakers, all of whom are my friends, my good friends. You know, sometimes I've been accused of just inviting my good friends to my conference, but that's how, you know, things operate in the academic world, I guess. And I'm sorry that this might seem to be what we call a manel, yeah? Or mainly a panel full of men, white and brown men. Unfortunately, we tried to get a woman speaker and we failed miserably. I'm sorry about this, and I must apologize as the head of the organizing committee. We're not going to commit this in any of the other main sessions anymore, yeah? But the damage has been done, and we will now try to rectify it with the great presentations by the many great speakers that we have. And we will go in accordance with the organized session already. We have Professor Purwo Santoso, we have Professor Paul Hedges, Professor Franz Wyssen, Professor Michael Northcott, and Dr. Rusdian Lubis. Now, for the first speaker, I would like to invite Professor Purwo Santoso, where he will be speaking about citizenship ethics for exercising popular control. Professor?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, our Dean, and participants, and also the panelists, thank you for allowing me to share what I've been thinking and feeling, what are needed in making democracy works in Indonesia. I use empirical evidence of Indonesia, and when we are talking about ethic, as it happened nowadays, everyone's talking about ethic, especially with regard to presidential action in response to general election. And the game has been named as Mahkamah Keluarga. But I will use as illustration in the context of also assessing how political science has been contribute in shaping the politics in Indonesia. And this is because I was having a clue from Dr. Dicky last night when he said that when we run a conference, we want to accommodate the interdisciplinary aspect of postgraduate program. So I'm looking at from political science, but inviting the perspective from other colleagues in other disciplines. Okay, citizenship ethic, I think is very strategic, but has been overstating its importance in the discourse for democratization in Indonesia. And there are some reasons which emitted in the way political science has been approaching the issues. For example, when we use the notion of popular control, and then at the same time we are having the idea of populism. Political science tend to use populism as a strategy to gain support, not the expressions of citizenship responsibility to have leader who really accountable, and because of its accountability, then people choose it. So popular control is more instrument for gaining power rather than the capacity of people, of the public, to make sure that whoever being chosen the most responsible one. So just this is the discourse which actually shaped the way we treat politics, we treat democracy, and citizenship is, there is such things, is more the formalistic aspect of it rather than expression of popular control. So then when we run the agenda for democratizing the country, Indonesia, well, there are significant progress, and we call it transition to democracy. And also we use the notion of consolidating democracy. For sure, there is up and down, and also there are a lot of breakthrough. But the articulations of citizenship ethic as commitment of citizens to deal with public and asserting control to public affairs, to the statehood, are not really the main story, because there are, I mean, the way we political science deal is very instrumentalistic rather than making sure that ethical articulation of citizenship, ethical articulations of sense of public are still fragmented in a way. So what my topic would like to address the kind of inherently left behind issues, that is the articulations of citizens, and universities are really responsible because the way we educate citizens, like the way we are handling courses on citizenship, I do teaching on that subject, are not really keen to empower citizens to be powerful to exercise popular control. And the way we do democracy is simply to measure up who are the winning contestant, and so then the media are very obsessed with seeking the winner, that is the contestant, rather than the articulations of popular control. Okay, if we look at the way we analyze and also treated political parties, it's nothing more than just political instrument to gain power, rather than instruments of the citizen to access public life, and also asserting power. Because, well, we do have the theory of three phases of popular representation. Representation at the constituent, representation at the organization of the party. We have a representation in the parliament, for example. But what we are dealing is mostly the mobilizations of people to political parties rather than the capability of ordinary people to shape the policy. We do have team successing team, to make sure that the candidate from the community are getting position within the parliament. But very rarely we do have team success or successing team for making policy. So the articulation of citizen control then remain within the control of executive, the bureaucrats, also the expert from university, rather than the ability of people to articulate their idea and then consolidate the policy. So then policy making is the privilege of technocrat, the bureaucrat, and university is part of it. So we do have democracy, but we don't have clear expressions of popular control in terms of policy making, and this has been ongoing for so long. And this already set by President Suharto with the New Order government and retained up to now. Well, we said that we have more democracy in terms of political freedom to elect and choose who are the representative, but we don't have the real expressions of what people are thinking on the ground and what are the response in policy making. So the capability of citizen to articulate their idea in policy makings are like set by other agencies, that is the bureaucrat, and political parties are not really mastering the process, and in some extent political parties are misrepresenting in the sense that well, they are really elected, but when they do policy making, what they do is making sure that they are getting elected, and one thing to do so is to distribute the wealth. For example, people talk about dana aspirasi, which actually meant to be project or program set by the government in the same, I mean, in terms of technocratic planning. But in fact, this is the way of delivering money from the political parties, from the people in the parliament to the community, and the way the accountability demanded cash and carry mechanism rather than, okay, we do have policy, and then because this is policy is about the system, then the way to demand accountability is asking for money, and political parties has no other way other than just sending the money back. And we do have a problematic scheme, we call it dana aspirasi, meaning the aspirative fund. But this is problematic because political parties through the elected government not meant to send the money, and yet because there are a lot of what I call it administrative engineering to show that the parliament, local parliament are accountable. So the cash and carry mechanism represented that we are not really having skill of organizing popular control. And this is because the way we are setting the model of citizenship, what sort of citizenship we are having. Well, technically, we said that all of the population in the country is a citizen, at least if they have ID card. But actually, they are not really exercising citizenship because government name them as population rather than rakyat, rather than people who has the capacity to control. And this way of addressing citizen as penduduk, meaning that the technocracy, the bureaucracy are really in control of what people have in mind, and then the idea of accountability of governments easily denied. Now, for example, let me use Nahdlatul Ulama as a community. People at Nahdlatul Ulama, the branch of Islamic organization, the largest one in Indonesia, for example, they have, the majority of Muslim in the country. And as they belong to Nahdlatul Ulama, we call them as Jamaah, Ummah, rather than citizen, but they do have a clever strategy because some of them are dedicated to affiliate with Parti Kebangkitan Bangsa, and from historical perspective, some of Nahdlatul Ulama members are affiliated with other parties, so that Nahdlatul Ulama play a very clever game. The militant or identity-minded people affiliated to the party which belong to Nahdlatul Ulama, but there are also members of Nahdlatul Ulama who are affiliated with other parties, and if we put in total more than half of Indonesian population, then the scattering around of the presentation in political parties become the strength. And on the one hand, people are looking after community who are psychologically affiliated with the organization, but at the other time, there are a lot of the Nahdlatul Ulama's members who also affiliated with the party, so that they have access to policy making through all of political parties. And this is smart game because there are sense of organizing citizenship on the one hand, and then having channel to all of the political parties are useful at some point. And then the challenge then how to make sure that when there is agenda or demand for accountability, how to make sure that people who are affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama in different organizations are capable or effectively demand accountability. So yes, access to policy making are there in the case, but since because accountability are not nearly well developed so far, then I feel that we need to make two emphases. One is the ethical basis for exercising democracy, and the articulation of citizenship is going to be more important, and citizenship is not just a matter of status. Okay, if that's the case, then the challenge is to make sure that the active citizen is what meant people are the people are who have democracy. We call it demos, active citizen, and active citizenship are not really that important in terms of making democracy work, and because we are not really well equipped in terms of popular control. So why the important element such as active citizenship is not there. But the way political science looking after democracy is more instrumental rather than essential empowering of citizens and making sure that the citizenship articulated in the way that capable in controlling the policy and like, and the capability in policy making, as I said, is not that developed. So, well, Indonesia taking part in consolidating democracy, but because of that situation, a lot of things are misbehaving. Okay, the last case to sum up and also to conclude is that, well, as democracy are consolidated and President Jokowi become like the symbol of democratizing Indonesia, and he gained a lot of popularity, but the way he exercised his popularity has been abused recently, and there are a lot of debate, a lot of comment, in essence is mobilizing sense of citizenship. So in a way, this is great, and well, the mistake of President Jokowi is one thing, but the awareness of the importance of accountability and also articulation of citizenship are kind of surprising, and this is a pleasant surprise, even though we are mumbling all around. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Santoso, for your exposition on the essentially the ethical deficit in the Indonesian political arena. But also I remember like 15 years ago when I was working in Jakarta on deepening democracy, you know, we had this idea that Indonesia will become a consolidated democracy by 2025, but now we are seeing a major decline in democracy and the shrinking of civil society activism in Indonesia. So thank you very much for that, Professor Santoso. So next we'll go to Professor Paul Hedges, where he will be talking about towards a global conversation on moral thinking, a perspective from the ethics of dialogue and interreligious ethics. Please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dickie, and I'm very glad to be here in Yogyakarta. Thank you also to the whole organising committee and of course the Dean and School for putting this together. So, during the global COVID-19 pandemic, we saw debates about how we protect our wider communities, particularly the vulnerable. No country or region had any singular response, but we saw certain patterns. Striking to many was the way that the initial response in many Asian countries of imposed lockdowns and restrictions was met in the Western media and in comments by politicians as unacceptable, a violation of individual human rights. But as COVID spread and its effect, especially across vulnerable groups, became clear, first in Italy and then across much of the rest of the Western world, we saw similar lockdowns occur. While this is partly a question of public policy, social health care provision, and the legislation of medicalised interventions, these responses tell us a lot about ethical realms of thought. It may be suggested that, as many have, that we see a distinction between a more individualised West and a more communitarian South, Southeast and East Asia. But I think this puts us into an unhelpful binary of two ideal types that misses a lot of the nuances and degrees of difference. A recent survey across Southeast Asia on social cohesion suggested that a focus on the common good is far less prevalent here than in many parts of the West. And again, at the risk of broad brushstrokes, many communitarian perspectives focus upon kinship groups rather than the wider society, which may be indicative of why the common good might take a lower priority in this part of the world. Yet, conversely, of course, hospitality to the stranger or traveller is often extended far more readily locally than in many Western and developed contexts. What I'm driving at is that while we may see a distinct difference across broad cultural groups, when we look more closely, we see a much more complex social environment. And going beyond, if you like, sort of simple antinomies or sort of defined sort of stereotypes, a global conversation needs to go beyond the reification of hyper-realities, as they've sometimes been termed. So on to my next point, global conversations, not global ethics. So the next slide, please. It is important, as I proceed, also to say what I am not doing in this paper. I would contrast my proposal for a global conversation with efforts of those by figures such as Hans Kung, Leonard Swidler. Oh, sorry, that was my outline. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the one. And Arvind Chava, who sought to define a global ethic as a singular set of principles. However, such an approach of a global ethics is, I believe, premature. We decide in advance almost what the answers are going to be, and we find a thin set of almost meaningless conceptions devoid of any content. Much is surely lost when a whole way of life becomes a catchphrase, a rationalized systemic encapsulation in a few words that replaces the being in the world as part of rich and varied worldview and set of behaviors. Each of them is contextual with its own internal arguments and distinctions as to what is right and wrong, and they may not, of course, even divide the world between good and evil and right and wrong. And certainly, I think, not in the way that many global ethics thinkers seem to think. Hence, I suggest we need to move towards a global conversation on moral thinking that recognises the territory is not simple or straightforward. For instance, within the traditional Japanese religio-cultural system of Shinto, the primary binary is not between right and wrong or good and evil, but pure and impure, which would give us a whole different set of conceptions. We need to explore the narratives, not the rules, and see that within worldviews and approaches to being, we see something much more complicated. But against some critics of the global ethics project, I wouldn't say that incommensurability rather than harmony is the stance we should take. There is a debate often framed between universalists who assume there is a common ethical value system and particularists who assert cultural relativism and the incompatibility of these worldviews. And rather than simply some middle way, we need to keep in mind that universality will make it hard for us to see what is different, but particularity rules out in advance what may be common ground. I can't enter into these debates here, but the Senegalese philosopher Souleymane Bakir Diagne has noted that the language of the universal is translation. In other words, as humans, we can communicate across worlds of difference and find ways of making meaning despite our languages and social cultural variations. And this accords with what we find in the hermeneutical philosophers such as Hans-Georg Gadamer and Paul Ricoeur in their work on interpretation and translation. We need a path, therefore, between sameness and difference. So I will turn now to an area I work in, which is dialogue studies. So the next slide, please, with particular focus on interreligious dialogue. And in terms of the ethics of dialogue, a foundational book is Martin Buber's very short but profound book, I and Thou. To offer a brief snapshot of some key ideas, Buber suggests that especially in our modern technological capitalist societies, and he wrote in 1923, a full 100 years ago before our own time, that we must move from regarding other humans as an it, that is to say something we objectify and employ for our own purposes, towards a Thou. Buber's original German title, Ich und Du, suggested repositioning that it is not an I and an it, but an I and a you. But the English translation has been seen as deeply felicitous, for the common workaday word of you becomes the more heavily invested Thou, denoting the seriousness and intensity of our relation to our human beings. Buber places the onus, we may say, despite or because of his Jewish heritage, on what we must do as humans in direct relationship with other humans, where we do not seek platitudes about God or anything else, as he states, and the quote is up here. When people come to you for help, do not turn them off with pious words, saying, have faith and take your troubles to God. Act, instead, as though there were no God, as though there were only one person in the world who could help, only yourself. Buber places a deep interpersonal relational ethics as a basis for human ethical interaction. You must be with the other person. And Buber suggests we must meet them as an equal, to see them as they are with their own wants, desires, and needs. I could, of course, say much more on Buber, but I move now to Emanuel Levinas. And Levinas, like Buber, was a Jewish thinker. And while Buber wrote in the aftermath of World War I, Levinas wrote not only after World War II, but after the Shoah, the Holocaust in which up to 6 million of his fellow Jews were intentionally killed by the Nazi regime and their associates. Often seen in step with Buber, Levinas was also critical, noting that Buber neglected power relations. We can never come and meet another person simply as an equal, because our positions in society rarely allow this. Some of us have more chances to benefit or harm an other. Our relations are nearly always unequal. And a key aspect of Levinas's thought was being before the face of the other, and he stresses to face encounter. And whereas Buber suggests that we can know almost fully the needs and desires and the wants of another person, Levinas stresses alterity, difference. His word, the other, stresses not our human similarity, but a deep dissonance and a barrier that we can almost never cross when we come before another, who is finally unknowable. As part of this, Levinas sees a deep sense of duty and responsibility in every relationship with whom we meet in this. The other is not simply another out there, but one I stand before owing ethical duty. And the first quote under Levinas above, according to my analysis, on the other hand, in the relation to the face, it is asymmetry that is affirmed at the outset. I hardly care what the other is with respect to me. That is his own business. For me, he is above all the one I am responsible for. And this is brought out by Levinas's concept of the face. When I stand before the other, Levinas tells us, the one thing we know and we see is the humanity, the plea of the other, do not kill me. And I think Dickie's introduction has sort of brought home some of the contemporary relevance of this. And he puts this almost poetically. From behind the bearing he gives himself or puts up with, in his appearance he calls to me and orders me from the depth of his defenceless nakedness, his misery, his mortality. In both Buber and Levinas, then, we see a strong ethical sense of human relations, and we could combine their terms to speak of the thou, other, as the one I must see not as an end in themselves or an object for my use, but one whom I have responsibility, unknown but fully aware of their humanity, and this calls to me as something that must be put foremost. Now, many have found Buber and Levinas deeply inspiring as a foundation for dialogue and more widely in ethical thought, but my suggestion is that in a global conversation, we might be able to see further if we go beyond the Western lineage. So the next slide, please. And so I will go now to the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh to see what his reflections may help us learn. As with my engagement with Buber and Levinas in this paper, I cannot do justice to the complexity and nuance of Hahn's thought, but hope to be able to show what he might help us beyond what we see from Buber and Levinas. One of Hahn's principal ideas is what he terms interbeing, which is an English translation of Buddhist thought, sometimes rendered into English as dependent co-arising, dependent origination, concision genesis. You have the Pali and Sanskrit up there. It speaks about the connectedness of all existence in a cycle. As such, it is not simply about ethical theory, but for Hahn and Buddhism as a whole, ethics, anthropology, cosmology all go hand in hand. And dependent co-arising is related to a number of other Buddhist concepts, that of anatman, or no self, and impermanence. As a mark of existence, dependent co-arising consists of 12 steps, looking at the way that we come to exist both within this life and in other lives, looking at our own impermanence in the present, our state of coming from one thing to another, but also that we depend upon everything else. And as a Mahayana Buddhist, for Han, this is linked to the concept of shunyata. This is often tamed into English by the term emptiness, but it's far from clear what shunyata means. Indeed, there is not any single meaning within the Buddhist tradition. By Western thinkers and interpreters, it's been termed everything from an empty void that shows the hollowness of existence to a fullness or plenitude of existence and some kind of ultimate reality or transcendent principle. Others have suggested it's just simply a linguistic or analytical tool to break down our conventional ways of thinking. Now, each of these has got some basis within Buddhist thought, but let's look what Han says of this. And for him, both emptiness and fullness can describe shunyata, while it may also be an analytical tool for helping us realize the entrapment inside language. He tells us that we are empty as a separate self, but full of everything. If I can have the next slide, please. An intriguing analogy he gives us the following. Suppose we see a sheet of paper, and he says, if you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. We can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are. In other words, Han tells us the sheet of paper is very full. The sun, the forests, ourselves are here within this one sheet of paper. But he also looks at the Heart Sutra, where he sees the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara speaking, and again the quote up here. According to Avalokiteshvara, this sheet of paper is empty, but according to our analysis, it is full of everything. There seems to be a contradiction between our observation and his. But this contradiction, he tells us, is simply apparent. Now, key in this is the notion of an Atman, which goes beyond simply stressing there is no single essence that is us, as in the paper cloud analogy, because we're part and parcel of everything else. And this, of course, is not new in Buddhist thought. One rationale for not killing and eating animals is that given our unfathomable regress of rebirths, every chicken, cow or pig could be, in a future or previous life, our own mother or father. But however, Han sort of wants to sort of go beyond this, to look not just at sort of animals, but plants, people, and the ecosystem as part of our interbeing with the whole. Moreover, for Han, our interconnectedness means that we're not other than those people we may need to work against. The following poem, Call Me By My True Names, was written by Han after he heard the story of a young girl who threw herself into the sea after being raped by a sea pirate. But rather than simply condemning the other and distinguishing ourselves as the good people from the evil people, Han's Buddhist metaphysics and ethics led him to contemplate the particular life ways that draw us into different paths. So the next slide, please. So a partial quote from Call Me By My True Names. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones. My legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. Please call me by my true names so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. If we had been born at other places, at other times, Han insists, we too may have made the life choices, may have been socialized in ways and had encounters that led us into becoming the sea pirate, into being, demands that we see the potential for both good and bad within ourselves, not to cut ourselves off and make a dichotomy of the community of the good and a community of the bad. There may be good actions and evil actions, but not, Hans suggests, good and evil people per se. Our limits of compassion and openness to the Zhao Other, this term from Buber and Levinas, must extend even across such borders. For if we must change the world, we must understand where those seemingly very different from ourselves come from. We do not condemn them, even while we condemn the action. Even the sea pirate and the arms dealer, or the Israeli military, are those we must treat as a Zhao Other if we seek to understand across borders of difference. So the final slide, please. So in contrast to the very interpersonal ethics of Buber and Levinas on the human plane, Hahn calls us to a more interrelational ethics, in which any meeting with a Zhao Other is not just with that singular person in their individuality, but within a network of connections that extends even beyond the human world. I would suggest that at least within the ethics of dialogue, this global conversation, which we may term a decolonizing approach to ethics, leads us to speak about the inter-other, and I use this term particularly, the inter-other, combining Levinas's term of the other and from Thich Nhat Hanh, the inter within that. So we can never, in Levinasian terms, stand just before that one face that calls us, because that single face of the inter-other and our own face are intertwined with many lives, with ecosystems, and numerous other inter-others, with whole communities and worlds of being. So we can never simply have an interpersonal encounter. Every encounter with any individual is always intercommunal and interrelational. Within this paper, I do not have the space to flesh this out further, nor to develop a wider global conversation. But I hope, returning to where I began, that we can start to see ways that a global conversation in moral thinking, rather than simply stating a new global ethic, will lead us to a richer and fuller picture of how we may think together and learn and be inspired by the narratives of ethics within particular worldviews and systems of thought, which may meaningfully interact and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation on essentially Thich Nhat Hanh's idea about the inter-other and the need for us to engage in a global conversation about moral thinking. So with that, I would like to invite the next presenter, Professor Franz Weissen, who will be presenting on ethics in science, academic integrity, and social safety. Your 15 minutes begins now.
Okay, thank you very much. Respected Dean, dear colleagues, organizing committee, staff, and students. When I saw the topic, can you share the PowerPoint? When I saw the topic ethics and science, I thought, oh, I can talk about my own research on ecology. And when I deal with the topic of ecology, it is clear that we cannot be value-free. We are biased. There is an ethical dimension in the topic of ecology. I'm not going to talk about that. I thought, okay, I can talk about academic integrity. We have regulations about fraud, about plagiarism. We have all kinds of regulations about how we construct, store, and access data. I can define plagiarism, I can define fraud. We have even a computer program to detect fraud. Although, just a small remark, as a lecturer in academic writing, I see very few master thesis or PhD thesis that have an adequate section on data management, so constructing, storing, and accessing data. But that's between brackets. I thought, let me talk about another issue that is not dealing with the activity, how we conduct our scientific research, but it is about you and me. It is about the actors, and it is about how we relate with each other. And I see that Gajah Mada University has a policy on health-promoting university, My own university speaks about safety, social safety on the campus. Of course, that is ethics in science, not about the activity itself, but about you and me doing science and the way we relate to each other. And it is obvious. This is much more ambiguous. This is much more complicated to cope with. We don't have a computer program yet to detect discrimination or harassment or abuse or whatever. So it is about us. I speak as, I was a dean for 8 years. In my own faculty, I dealt with some issues. I have some experience at UGM, and I was just interested, okay, can we learn from each other? And I'm particularly interested in the question, is this a cultural issue? I mean, is there a cultural factor involved? Or is it about personality traits? In fact, for me, this is a new topic. It is not my field of research, but I thought, well, when we talk about ethics in science, I think this needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. Last month, the rector of my university, Radboud University, resigned 3 weeks before his retirement, after serving as a rector for 8 years, because of a case that happened 7 years ago, in the first year of his being rector. And to most of us, that came as a complete surprise. Also for me, as a dean, of course, I had to deal with the rector many times. I knew this person as very respectful, faithful person. So it came as a complete surprise that he was accused of, yeah, I don't know what he was accused of. In his own statement, there is a lot of publication. I just quoted some websites if you are interested in the case itself. In his own observation, he made a funny statement 7 years ago, but it was interpreted by a female employee to be offensive. The case was invested by a committee and took a lot of energy, took a lot of time, and ultimately the committee decided or thought that the statement could be interpreted as intimidating, and the rector got a warning that a warning was a proportional sanction. At that time, the rector and the executive board thought, can I continue as a rector? But then they said, well, of course, I mean, you just continue as a rector. 7 years later, 3 months before his retirement, this came out, of course, in the press. And and the committee took into account that as a rector, you are a public figure and you have to give the good example. So university administrators are extremely vulnerable for these kinds of cases. A conversation that lasted only 2 minutes, 2 minutes, ruined the life of 2 people, and it split the academic community completely in a pro and contra camp. And we are talking about it, we are publishing about it, we have hearings, dialogues, trainings, and so on and so on and so on. So it is a serious issue that affects all of us. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do, I just summarize what I could find in my own university. Then I will deal with Gadjah Mada University, what I found on websites and talking to some colleagues. And of course, the most important part for me is what can we learn from this and how can we deal with this. So in my university, we talk about a safe university, and I give definition here. Social safety consists of a safe environment in which cooperation, equality, openness, and consideration for each other are important. Together we create a socially safe environment. Students and staff can be themselves and treat each other respectfully, regardless of origin, belief, gender, sexual orientation, disability, role, or position. And then on the website, if you go to the Radboud University website, it defines undesirable behavior, sexual harassment, discrimination, aggression, violence, bullying. It has 16 codes of conduct for staff and students. Now, it is simply impossible to go through all the definitions and all the rules of conduct. that would take a full day. I have only 15 minutes. I just give you the definition of undesirable behavior. At Radboud University website, undesirable behavior is defined as, I quote, direct or indirect undesired remarks or acts manifested in verbal, non-verbal, physical behavior towards a person which is experienced by the latter as undesirable and unwanted, and which constitutes a violation of their integrity in such a way that it results in work or study-related psychological stress. End of quote. Of course, when you see a definition as this, what is undesirable? Where is the boundary between desirable, undesirable? What circumstances? What personalities, and so on? Very difficult to cope with that. And the boundary between desirable and undesirable is, in my opinion, quite fluid. And we are talking about it now for years. We have regulations, we have codes of conduct, trainings for staff and students. And this, as the case that I started with showed, it really split our academic community, whereas most of us simply want to do their job. You know, they want to teach, they enjoy teaching, they enjoy studying, and I think, that is my personal conviction, in my university, it has really gone out of control. Okay, let us go to Gadjah Mada University. Next slide, please. Universitas Gadjah Mada portrays itself as a health-promoting university. I looked at various websites, I talked to colleagues, students, what's going on. UGM prioritizes student well-being and provides resources to help them on their journey, preparing them not only in academics aspects, but also in personal and interpersonal aspects that form quality individuals. End of quote. Now, when I look at the website, you have programs on mental health, physical activities, healthy diet, healthy literacy, healthy, safe and disabled-friendly environment, zero tolerance of violence, bullying, harassment, zero tolerance of drugs, alcohol, and tobacco, reproductive health. I refer to websites that you can find. On the official account of the Task Force for Preventing and Handling Sexual Violence, I will come back to that later, there is a reference to anti-toxic relationship training for students. I quote, higher education as an environment where students undergo important development phases has a significant role in shaping students' views, behaviors, and skill in managing relationships with others. Toxic relationships can have a serious impact on students' mental, emotional, and physical well-being, which in turn can interfere with academic achievement and personal development. This problem needs to be acknowledged and handled seriously by educational institutions in order to create healthy and supportive campus environment. End of quote. Now, Gadjah Mada is good in social media. You can find Instagram and Facebook even have all policies of Gadjah Mada University. There is a task force for preventing and handling sexual violence. There are trainings given. And there are first aid responders for handling sexual violence. I'm sure most of you know these websites and programs, although I spoke to some colleagues and staff and students, and they were not very aware of what was going on. Okay, I just presented two cases, my own university and Radboud University, and Universitas Gadjah Mada. Of course, it is most important, what can we learn, what can we conclude, what can we learn? Conclusions. Next slide, please. Universitas Gadjah Mada speaks about a healthy, a health-promoting university. My own university, Radboud University, speaks about a safe university, but we deal with the same issue. Once again, it does not deal with the activities, it deals with the actors. It deals with you and me. How do we relate in a university setting and in constructing our knowledge. Gajah Mada University speaks about anti-toxic relationships. My university speaks about non-discrimination in all possible forms. Of course, the concern is the same. As far as I can see, UGM policy is much broader. It deals with diet, deals with sport activities, but it is very much focused on zero tolerance of sexual abuse. Most of the things that I found was about that topic. Radboud University also has, of course, a policy on zero tolerance of sexual abuse, but the policy is more focused, I think, on forms of hidden forms of exploitation in knowledge production. And as far as I can see, the policy at UGM is more focused on students, at least what I can find on the website. In my university is more focused on the staff. Just some reflections. When I looked at the definitions, we cannot make everything concrete. As I said in the beginning, I can define plagiarism. I have a computer program to detect plagiarism. That's more concrete. That is more, how we can cope with that. But in terms of abuse, harassment, discrimination, it's much more ambiguous. I mean, I needed to make a list of 1,000 statements or 10,000 statements that could possibly be interpreted as offensive by some people under some certain conditions. That is simply impossible. That is simply impossible. Also, in my experience, the boundary between moral and legal effects of what we say is very ambiguous. Many things that we say are not illegal. They might be immoral, but not illegal. So, and I have seen many court cases, employees going to the court to defend their rights. I think that is not the way we should go, at least from my perspective. What are proportional sanctions? I mean, I started with the case of the director of my university. A sanction is never proportional, and there will always be one of the parties who disagree. In that case that I reported, the committee said, well, a warning is a proportional sanction. Of course, the person that felt offended thought it was not proportional. And then 7 years after the case, 3 months before this person retired, she went to the journalist who made a big case of it, ruined the life of herself, but also of the rector. Is that the way we should go? I don't know. Trainings, we give trainings, we have hearings, we have dialogues, very good, very good. But in my view, they should be proportional and they should really address the needs and the conditions under which those acts occur. And of course, that is not very easy. Discussion. When we talk about ethics in science, and I talk not about the activity itself, I talked about the actors, I talked about you and me, relating to each other in knowledge production. It is good that we are alert. We are not always aware what we say. I'm sure I know the rector of my university very well. He was not aware of the fact that his statements, which he thought was funny, could have been interpreted in a way that was felt offensive. I think he was not aware. So it is good that all of us are aware of this issue and that some things that we say or do might be interpreted as offensive. And we should help each other in doing that, being aware. Of course, there are serious cases, but to the best of my knowledge, these are not structural or cultural, although cultural may play a role. In most cases that I had to deal with as a dean, this was really two different personality traits, two people that just don't get along with each other. Correct me if I'm wrong, and we can have that in the discussion. The academic world is highly competitive. Sometimes as a leader, I put pressure on an employee to perform better in order to enhance his or her career. Is that exploitation? When I say, okay, you want to be a professor, okay, you have to publish more and so on, is that offensive? If that person comes from a minority group, I'm talking about a case that concerned myself. As a dean, I had to go to the committee because a person from a minority group wanted to become a professor and said, well, you have to work a bit harder. I don't remember how exactly I said it, but it was interpreted as discrimination, and I had to defend myself. Is that the way we should go? When I supervise PhD students, some students have a writing block. Say, oh, professor, you know, my husband or my children or my mother and so on. So, tears, tears, tears. In the past, I would say, oh, well, let us have a talk. Maybe I would have embraced the person. Of course, I don't do that anymore. Yeah? I don't do that anymore. Do we want a university where we are purely task-oriented, where any personal dimension is simply deleted? Is that the way we should go? Another issue that I see is that many colleagues don't want to have a leadership position. It is more and more difficult to find a dean or a director or a head of department. Because when you are in a leadership position, as the example that I gave shows, you are extremely vulnerable. Because people say, yeah, but you are a leader. You must give the good example. So many people say, well, I do my job, you know, don't want to be a dean. So it is very difficult to run a university without people who are willing to serve in leadership positions. Last but not least, and I stop here, when I talk about ethics in science, we must trust. I want to trust. And I want to invest in the moral compass of academicians. And I think whatever we do, all our regulations, our trainings, our programs, our dialogue, really must focus on that. Yeah? How do we relate as actors in science in a way that we respect each other, we don't discriminate each other, and we work together. That is not easy, because it deals with you and me as human beings, but I think that is the way to go. Let me stop here and give the floor back to the dean.
Thank you very much, Professor Wyson. You have given us your assessment and analysis in terms of how to bring about a healthy and safe environment for academics, staff members, as well as students. So next we'll go to Professor Michael Northcott. He'll be talking about ethics of genetic modification of cells and organisms, biotechnology and the future of life. Now, Professor Northcott had just launched his book entitled God and Gaia, which was just recently published by Routledge. So, Professor, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you make the slides full screen, please? Can you make the slides full screen, please?
Yeah.
No, apparently not. Okay, so this is a case study of biotechnology. It concerns this university and a project in Bali, which has not yet launched but is about to launch, which has been called the Bali, thank you very much, the Bali Mosquito Program. So it's a case study in biotechnology and Balinese cosmography. Next slide, please. The hero of the story in UGM is Professor Adi Uttarini, who worked with Australians at Monash University in the World Mosquito Program to introduce a biotech-modified mosquito into the Yogyakarta province. She experienced initially, and unsurprisingly, resistance from the government of this province, but she fought against it and finally persuaded them that she should be allowed to release millions of biotech-engineered mosquitoes into Yogyakarta on the basis it will reduce dengue infections. The case that it would happen was based on an Australian pilot in Cairns, and it was Australians that invented the technology using what's called CRISPR, Cas9 gene editing, by which they were able to insert Wolbachia bacteria into the embryo of mosquitoes, which then pass the bacteria on to progeny. This is genetic engineering, but quite cleverly, Professor Uttarini decided not to call it genetic engineering. So it's an interesting case study in the ethics of science. What are we doing in the laboratory, and what do we tell the public about what we are doing? Next slide, please. So the research has been now touted in the journal Nature. It's said that the strategy pursued here in Yogyakarta can eliminate dengue, and it does this by inserting a bacteria found in common fruit flies into Aedes aegypti mosquitoes embryos, which are then bred in situ, in the field, as they were in Yogyakarta, in Sleman, in Depok, in Bantul, in households, and released in millions. And then the theory is dengue infections go down. Next slide, please. So the research here in UGM demonstrated they had ways for proving that these modified Aedes mosquito had spread throughout the Yogyakarta area, and they successfully established then in the wild, not in the laboratory, but throughout the city, a new strain of mosquito engineered in the lab. Next slide, please. The New England Journal of Medicine then reported that a random controlled trial here in Jogja, where they took participants, one from the project release areas and others from the places where the mosquitoes originally were not released, and they found lower rates of dengue infection in the project release areas, which the statistics put out by the NJM and Professor Uttarini is that it's a 77% reduction in dengue infections, which is a fantastic result, it must be said. Next slide, please. And of course, it was then reported in local media that the World Mosquito Program, originally begun by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, had been successful here in Yogyakarta, and Yogyakarta became the poster child then for the global biotech modification of insects to address human health issues. But of course, this is not uncontroversial. Next slide, please. This is a slide from the government's own evidence on the trial in Yogyakarta and the proposal to roll out this trial across the whole of Java and then Bali and Sulawesi and throughout the whole of Indonesia. The statistics in this government slide are very different from the statistics reported in the publicity for the program, and including in the New England Journal of Medicine. You'll see that immediately before the trial, there was a huge increase in dengue infections throughout the region where the trial took place. And I have yet to discover the reason for this huge increase. And there was another huge increase after the release of the mosquitoes in 2018. So although the randomized control statistics look great, 77%. To me, when I look at this trial in Yogyakarta, I see pretty much the same rates of infection at the end of the trial, 2022, as I do at the beginning. But I see a mysterious rise in mosquito dengue infections immediately before the trial, which will, of course, massively improve the statistics. I don't know the reason for that, and I'm very interested to find it out. So, obviously, we are dealing, next slide please, here with the genetic modification of species that are being released into the wild. This is not unprecedented. It's been done with soya and corn in Brazil, engineering glyphosate resistance into those plants. But of course, what's happened in Brazil is that glyphosate resistance has spread to other plants, and now farmers have huge problems with trying to eradicate the weeds that are now on their farms, which are like triffids, because they are pesticide resistant. Monsanto claimed that the gene for glyphosate resistance would not spread in the wild. I claimed back in '98 in a research study I was involved in that it would spread in the wild, because nature, you've all seen Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. We think we can control that. Professor Uterini is described in Nature as a commander of mosquitoes. Well, she's not. I'm afraid to say nature has its own way, and we don't command nature. Nature finds ways around what we do. Anyway, next slide. What we're looking at then is the introduction of symbionts into Indonesia in order to address public health problems. And indeed, in WHO literature, mosquitoes are being increasingly redescribed not as a pest, but as a biocide. Now, there are other precedents for this in genetic engineering. I'm not going to go into them now as I haven't got the time. Next slide, please. Now, clearly, there were ecological risks in the program here in Jakarta and in the Global World Mosquito Project. The plan is to spread these genetically engineered mosquitoes throughout the northern and southern hemisphere. 120 countries Bill Gates wants to put them in. Now, the scientists in the World Mosquito Project say, well, but bacteria are natural, and because they're only micro-injected into embryos, the mosquitoes themselves are not transgenic. However, the mosquitoes pass on a novel bacteria from embryo to embryo, and the plan is to eradicate other mosquitoes that don't carry the World bacteria. This is biotech engineering, modification of insects, whatever the semantics may be. So the question is, if bacteria do not naturally occur in Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, how can scientists say they are not genetically modified? I find this very curious. The method was invented in Australia. It's a gene editing method. And it seems to me quite clear that because the biotech modification of the insect is vertically transmissible from generation to generation, and the plan is that these modified mosquitoes will outcompete all other mosquitoes, including non-Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, it seems to me quite clear that we are dealing with genetic modification of insects here in Indonesia on a very large scale. And there is, of course, no study which can demonstrate that the long-term risks, beyond 5 years, are known. And yet the project is already being rolled out, or proposed to be rolled out, on another island. Next slide, please. So then, for me, there are a number of ethical questions about the World Mosquito Project concerning whether or not the steep increases in the early years of the programs in Yogyakarta, the same thing has now occurred in Sri Lanka, have anything to do with the rollout of the project. I just don't know. But I do find it very odd that we see these sudden increases and then later on it's said that the project reduced them. I'm also very curious why the scientists involved do not want these insects to be called genetically modified. Is this to avoid scrutiny by regulatory authorities and international treaties about genetically modified organisms? What we are dealing here with is the introduction of novel engineered species into the wild, and this has always had unanticipated consequences wherever it has been done on the planet up to this time. Who decides that the benefits outweigh the risks? Is it experts? Next slide, please. Or is it citizens? I'm going to have to go a bit faster, but in Sri Lanka, next slide, please. We've got a new project there, and they've released them in Colombia. Next slide. Next slide. And 2 years on from the beginning of the program, next slide, we have 2 media reports, and there are many other media reports, of a tripling of dengue cases in Sri Lanka. 2 years since the launch of the World Mosquito Program in Sri Lanka. Next slide. There are a number of unknowns to me about the Sri Lanka World Mosquito Project. I'm not going to go into them in detail now, but it is very curious. At the first 2 years of the project, we have a 3 times increase in dengue infections. Next slide, please. Moving on then, we have Bali. In the last 10 days, it's become public knowledge, and it's now being reported in the media that Bali is the proposed next poster child for the World Mosquito Project. Next slide, and the next. A number of us in Bali have become concerned about this. We started a social media campaign only a few weeks ago. We tried to hold meetings with officials. I've met with officials in Bali. A number of other people have met with officials in Bali. And we have raised, next slide, questions about whether or not the Balinese have been properly consulted about the plan to replace all the mosquitoes in Bali with biotech-engineered mosquitoes. Next slide, please. The government and Ministry of Health's own statistics do not indicate that Bali has a huge problem with Aedes mosquito mortality. There were 10 people who got hemorrhagic dengue fever and died from it in Bali last year. There were 450 suicides in Bali last year. There were 900 deaths on motorbikes, trucks, and other bits of the charming transport infrastructure of Bali. So why all this huge amount of money and foreign aid focus on these 10 cases? Next slide, please. The plan is to release them in Denpasar, next slide please, and in Buleleng in the north, so north and south of Bali. Next slide please. What we don't know about the Bali, what we know about the Bali plan is that there should be 200 million modified mosquito eggs, which have the potential to produce 5 billion Aedes mosquitoes within 6 months. A number of areas of Denpasar and Buleleng have been selected. The start date is only a week's time. We're campaigning very hard right now in Bali to stop this. We've heard that the cabinet in Jakarta are now discussing this and it will be delayed. And that the Ministry of Health have been asked to delay it. What is very curious is that permission for the introduction of a new species for health regions was not sought from the Coordination Authority in Jakarta, as required by Indonesian law from 2017. There was also no Bali-wide consultation of community and spiritual leaders, politicians, citizens, or tourist business owners. Next slide, please. I've been involved in GM research since 1996. I studied the sheep on the top there. She was made in Edinburgh, the first cloned animal. I met her. I worked with the scientists on the ethics of genetic engineering, and my most recent work was a multi-country study which we published as Governing Agricultural Sustainability, in which we found that the transmutation of plants and animals in the wild do have consequences for humans and other animals which were not anticipated by the scientists in the long term. Next slide, please. So the Bali unknowns include that we have no risk assessment. We know that for a fact. And we have no risk assessment in particular of the unique cultural and ecological Subak system of Bali, which is a 1,000-year-old rice-growing system, which is intrinsic to the culture of Bali. And we don't know why Bali was selected for the expansion of the Indonesia World Mosquito Project. Bali was not in the original Ministry of Health plan for Indonesia. It seems to be primarily Australian government money behind the Bali Mosquito Project, and also Save the Children. But of course also Monash University, and their project is Gates funded, so we can't leave Gates out of it. Next slide, please. There are parallels between the mosquito project in Bali and the Bali irrigation project. I don't have time to go into these slides in detail. Next slide, please. But briefly to say, agricultural engineers tried to totally transform the Subak system of Bali in the 1970s and 80s, and it had disastrous results. Next slide, please. It led to shortages in rice. It led to droughts, floods, new pests and new diseases, and whatever the scientists threw at it, they couldn't solve the problems. Next slide, please. Eventually, the Balinese started a campaign for a return to the water temple governed control of rice growing in Bali. And eventually, next slide, please, they were listened to. This is a quote from an anthropologist, Stephen Lansing, who did fieldwork on the project, and eventually the people who ran the Bali irrigation project, next slide please, began to listen to the Balinese, and as Lansing describes in his book Priests and Programs, finally the priests beat the programmers. So for me as a religious studies professor, I really like this particular case study. Next slide please. The difficulty with the Bali mosquito project is it is irreversible. We are still dealing with the effects of the Bali irrigation project 50 years on. I have many friends who are still in the process of trying to get Bali back to organic agriculture, to improve the soils and so on. But if these mosquitoes are released in Bali and wipe out all the indigenous insects, mosquitoes, it's impossible to reverse it. It's irreversible. And the proposal for Bali is what's called by the Mayor of Denpasar a massive release. So next slide, please. We have been campaigning hard. We finally started to get news stories in the press in Bali. Next slide, please. We've issued leaflets in Bahasa and in English to the Balinese and the tourists. Next slide, please. We've set up QR codes. We've done a whole bunch of things. Next slide, please. And on Monday, next slide, please, 6th of, you're ahead of me there. Next slide, please. On Monday, the 6th of November, there was a meeting between Save the Children, who are the main sponsors, along with Monash University and the Australian government, and Balinese officials. I'm out of time, but at that meeting, essentially, the priests of Bali and representatives of the people of Bali said, this is not an intervention in Bali which is consistent with Balinese beliefs in the balance of nature, in natural law, in the traditional balance between the forces, male and female, creative and destructive, height and depth, which is at the essence of Balinese religion and the Balinese way of growing rice. Last slide, please. For me, as a religious studies scholar, this case study raises a very interesting question. From what I can tell, there was not much resistance to this project in the province of Yogyakarta, a very old province with a long Islamic tradition. And yet, in Bali, even before the project has begun, there is huge resistance based upon partly religious and cultural beliefs. I'm very interested to know, from an interreligious perspective, what this tells us about the different attitudes of Abrahamic faiths vis-a-vis Hinduism and other indigenous traditions in relation to biotechnology and the ethics of scientific innovation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Michael Northcott, on the genetic modifications and the negative impacts it might have on the environment and society. And this is a good transition to our next speaker, Dr. Rusdian Lubis, who's a good friend of mine, and he was actually in charge as Vice President of Environmental Impact in Freeport, and previously also in ADB. But he's also a novelist. He's written a lot about cats, and he's currently writing a new novel on frogs, I believe, in Papua. So please, Dr. Lubis.
Thank you, Pak Diki. With your permission, I'm going to switch back and forth, Bahasa Indonesia and in English, and maybe also Japanese. Kulo Lubis namung lahir wonten Solo, ageng wonten Banyumas. Dados saged bahasa Jawi. Sorry. This is quite interesting. Everyone think about the World Bank, ADBs, all of the regional bank. Next, please. What are they doing basically? Apa yang mereka lakukan di sana? So all of this bank institutional, what we call IFIs. Well, I think I'm better talking in English than bahasa Jawi. That gave a lot. This all of IFIs or international financial institution. They promote economic growth, reduce poverty, improve governance, address global challenges, and now also climate change. But I worked for almost 6 years at the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and then I moved as a VP level at Asian Development Bank. We know that all of what IFIs has also an impact. For example, kalau kita membangun suatu infrastruktur yang besar, maka juga akan misalkan nanti akan saya ceritakan, this is about the railway in Cambodia. They will also have an impact on this menggusur. Menurut Pak Bahlil tidak menggusur tapi menggeser katanya. Jadi menggusur dan menggeser ada beda sedikit. They voluntarily will move the people out of these areas. Also an impact on biodiversity. Pak Diki told me about frog. Yes, I'm now writing a frog. They call Liptoria lubisi. Ini kode ini dinamakan atas nama saya karena saya juga it is about green frog that I found in Papua. They name it after me now, Liptoria lubisi. I think it was very it's honor, right? It's a big honor for us scientists, right? Okay, next please. maybe the mosquito will be under your name, right? Next please. Kembali lagi. Now, when we operate in such a large-scale infrastructure with $1 million of money, then IFIs, the World Bank, ADB, will also need to have an ethics on that. Itu yang dikatakan oleh di sini adalah not just only ethic, but also accountability, because just doing the ethical things without accountability is basically nothing. We can discuss ethic for, since Socrates to Rawls, but then who is accountable in this thing? Saya bisa mengatakan, ya saya punya etika dengan apa yang terjadi di mana, katakanlah di Papua. Tapi kalau saya tidak berbuat sesuatu, I am not accountable with that, ya sama aja bohong di situ. Anyway, nggak bohong tapi ada sesuatu lah. Now the ethical values is based on the accountability, then IFI has to have procedures and policies to basically to elicit atau untuk mencoba mendengarkan masyarakat yang dikenai dampak tersebut. Next. Nah, untuk inilah kenapa itu accountability menjadi penting di dalam IFIs. Nomor satu adalah we need to gain trust and confidence dari orang-orang yang dikenai dampak. Dan kedua adalah juga membuat IFIs credible. They have to have credibility on and of course the ethical standard and transparency in their dalam tindakannya. Next. Untuk itu, ethics accountability need to have some guidance on that. Jadi tidak hanya diomongkan dan di dalam batin, tapi juga ada satu policies, guideline, procedure, standard dan sebagainya yang harus diikuti. For example, ADB has what they call the safeguard policies. IFC, International Finance Corporation, ini yang memberikan bantuan kepada private, itu juga yang mempunyai dengan performance standards. I work now in IIF, Indonesian Infrastructure Fund. Basically, we giving money to build infrastructures. We also have to abide for mostly for IFC performance standard. Nah, disinilah kemudian yang ketiga adalah ada etika, ada accountability, ada procedures, harus ada body, harus ada satu institusi yang mengawasi ini. Nah, disinilah di World Bank namanya Inspection Panel, di ADB saya pernah menjadi chairman-nya selama 5 tahun, namanya CRP atau Compliance Review Panels, and also CAO. This is not IMF, this is IFC. CAO itu singkatan dari Compliance, Advisory, and Ombudsman. I worked for 5 years in ADB in that position. I don't make too many friends because we are looking there from there, behind their back on their project. Next. Intinya ini saya cepat saja. Intinya adalah beberapa principles, transparency, scrutiny, oversight dari stakeholders. What are the stakeholders? Anda sekalian adalah stakeholders nih dari bantuan-bantuan dari ADB, World Bank dan sebagainya. Jadi when our government borrow money from World Bank or ADB or other JBIC dan others, we are the stakeholders. NGO, masyarakat adalah stakeholders. Next. Ini hanya satu comparison quickly apa yang dilakukan oleh World Bank dan ADB. World Bank look on the policies. Whether on the policies and operational policies. Jadi ini lebih kepada high level policies. Tapi bank regional bank seperti ADB, African Development Bank dan sebagainya, kita melihat lebih detail kepada safeguard policy, standard dan sebagainya. And also in CRP in our office or my office before, we have two functions. Number one is what they call the project facilitator, basically mediation. Jadi kalau ada komplain dari masyarakat, kita mediate dulu nih, bisa nggak komplainnya diselesaikan tanpa harus melalui investigasi. If they're not, it's stuck. Kalau itu gagal, then we move to investigation. That's my job. It's a lot of work and it's very demanding. And for example, the case of Cambodia took us 17 months before coming into conclusion. I will discuss it later. Next. Apa yang bisa kita pelajari dari IFI accountability mechanism adalah increase transparansi, stakeholder engagement, NGO bisa bersuara, masyarakat bisa bersuara, dan sebagainya. Tetapi dari IFI sendiri, for the World Bank and ADB, we also learn from that, because then we can also learn from past mistake. For example, in the case of Cambodia, the ADB then learned how to deal with Cambodian government. I work in Central Asia. I was in Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. What interests me in that, especially Kyrgyzstan, although the past communist countries, hak atas tanah itu tidak ada di sana. Jadi tidak ada guna usaha, belum ada waktu itu, tidak ada hak privat seperti itu. Sehingga pada waktu kita masuk ke Kyrgyzstan, pemerintah Kyrgyzstan mengatakan, why we should worry about hak masyarakat yang mau digusur, katanya. Ada juga di Kamboja. Karena semua tanah yang negara itu adalah milik negara, katanya. Why we worry about this one? Nah, kemudian setelah lama debat, akhirnya mereka juga sadar bahwa masyarakat juga punya hak sebenarnya, biarpun itu bukan private. Ini yang menarik waktu di Kyrgyzstan, Pak Diki. Akhirnya case yang dilakukan oleh IDB itu dibawa ke parlemen, sehingga mereka membuat undang-undang mengenai hak atas tanah di situ. It was a quite interesting lesson learned. Next. Challenge-nya apa di sini? Challenge yang saya hadapi waktu itu adalah ADB World Bank adalah suatu organisasi yang besar dan sangat kompleks. Jadi kami harus berhadapan dengan si project owner, dengan vice president. Jadi 17 bulan yang kita lakukan itu mostly deal with within and outside of the IFIs. Next. Yang kedua, kita juga berhadapan dengan negara peminjam. Pak Diki, kasus di waktu kita menggusur masyarakat di Citarum, itu antara, ini saya ceritakan aja, antara pemerintah pusat dan pemerintah daerah pada waktu itu, bahkan level kabupaten, mereka saling lempar nih, siapa yang harus menanggung biaya penggusuran, pembayaran ganti rugi ya. Nah, ini menariknya. Di Indonesia mungkin belum terbiasa orang-orang illegal settlers atau pendatang haram itu diganti rugi. Tapi aturan dari ADB, I'm trying to quote in a legal manners, in the absence of property right or property rights or legal property right, in the absence of that, it's not a bar to the compensation. Jadi tidak bahasa Inggrisnya, bahasa sederhananya adalah kalau mereka tidak mempunyai hak atas tanah pun itu tidak menggagalkan ADB untuk atau pemerintah untuk membayar ganti rugi. Ini menjadi hal yang sangat challenging untuk ADB dan itu. But again, this is an ethical issue here. Next. Oke, ini saya skip aja supaya cepat. Intinya adalah ini menarik ini. What next in the future? Pada waktu saya di ADB 2009 itu yang dinamakan Zoom, dinamakan apa itu? Apalagi kecuali Zoom ada kenapa? Pokoknya yang seperti itulah, itu belum ada itu. Jadi satu case waktu kita ke Fuzhou, ke Cina, kita ditolak masuk Cina nih. Karena Cina, case-nya adalah urban development dan itu menggusur banyak orang. Kita ingin masuk melakukan investigasi. Cina menolak, Anda tidak boleh masuk. Itu lama sekali, kita hampir 4 bulan. Kita berdebat dengan pemerintah Cina supaya kita masuk atau tidak. Andai kata pada waktu itu sudah ada Zoom, sudah ada itu yang drone segala macam, kita bisa meminta datanya dari situ. Biarpun sebenarnya juga tidak benar juga, karena kita ingin berhadapan dengan mereka yang tergusur, bukan hanya data elektronik seperti itu. Akhirnya kasus Fuzhou kita aborted, kita nggak jadi masuk, dan banyak sekali pada waktu itu saya mendapatkan serangan dari NGO, kita dianggap kalian banci, tidak berani masuk Cina dan sebagainya. Itu kasus yang paling berat, membuat saya stres pada waktu itu, karena diplomasi dan negosiasinya antara antara ADB dan pemerintah Cina itu begitu serius sehingga Presiden ADB pun turun tangan, itu pun tidak berhasil. Next. Local communities. sangat penting untuk di-involve ke dalam kasus-kasus seperti itu. Kasus Citarum misalkan, kemudian kasus Kirgistan, Sri Lanka, gitu. Ada 6 kasus pada waktu di sana, 6 tahun saya di sana. They have to be involved. The NGOs has to be involved in that. As a matter of fact, the NGO is the one who complain first, not the local. Next. Oke, ini civil society jelas ini sangat penting peranan NGO. Next. Capacity building juga penting, jadi untuk membuat ethics and accountability, public just like you, all of young people here need to understand what is accountability, what is our roles and responsibility, itu juga penting. You all have voice dalam hal ini. Next. Global trend, kita juga menghadapi climate change dan sebagainya, which is a bit not unusual, but something that it is. Coba sekarang begini nih, ini satu kasus di Palawan. Ada satu NGO mengatakan bahwa pabrik semen itu menyebabkan perubahan iklim di sana. Loh, gimana cara membuktikan itu? Hanya satu pabrik. Nah, ini sesuatu hal yang challenging dari aspek teknologi dan science di sini. Next. Oke, ini yang terakhir Pak. Jadi, this is a case in Cambodia, railway. Pada waktu itu pemerintah Kamboja ingin membangun suatu jalan, atau bukan membangun, itu jalan yang ada itu, lihat rel kereta api itu sudah jadi pasar, sudah jadi pemukiman, dan itu sangat menarik. It's very interesting. When the rain comes, orang-orang itu minggir semua tuh. Jadi keretanya bisa jalan. Nanti begitu keretanya sudah lewat, mereka kembali lagi ke situ. You have to look at the YouTube. Very interesting itu. Bagaimana mereka bisa menjajakan barangnya, diangkut kembalikan. Ini kalau Jabodetabek mungkin pusing karena KRL kan berapa menit sekali lewat. Anyway, the case was almost 4,000 household has to be relocated, and the Cambodian government doesn't want to pay for that because this is going to be expensive. The land are not owned by them, the land is owned by the state. Now after 17 months going to go back and forth. I think I was in a 3 meeting. First meeting I was rejected by them, go back to Manila. Second meeting, because there was some pressure from ADB that, okay, if you don't want to go this route, we will hold the money. Then they think about this one. Then the third meeting, we have more amicable discussion and come into conclusion. Itu Pak Diki, thanks very much. Mungkin saya terburu-buru.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lubis. Now you have seen 5 presentations. And I think if one were to find the sort of silver lining in all of these presentations, I can at least find 3 things. One is there is this so-called sort of ethical deficits in many aspects of our lives, in many divisions in our professions as well. And secondly, there is, as Dr. Lubis was saying, this power asymmetry, this imbalance of power, whether it be between the state, government, and civil society, whether it be the government and the citizens, or whether it be between the faculty members, staff, and students, or what have you. There is that power imbalance. And thirdly, I think the role of accountability. How do we bring people and institutions accountable so that the citizens or the students or the staff members don't become victimized by our current system. So of course, from all of these presenters, we can see the different kinds of perspectives, different kinds of approaches, including the sort of religious, moral, philosophical understanding about reality and about how one should go about coming to terms with many of the unethical ways of living in this world, and how to deal with that more directly. So I've been told by the MC that we will have a question and answer session for 15 minutes, so we will defer the coffee break until 11 a.m. with your permission, yeah? So with that, I'd like to open a question and answer session, and I think the first round should go to perhaps 3 persons. Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Please approach the mic where you can find them. And if you don't mind walking to the mic for the second and third questioner. Mas, can you go to the mic as well so that we can be quick about it? Yes.
Okay.
First question.
My name is Arbania Fitriani. I am a student from doctoral leadership and innovative policies. Actually, I have 5 questions, but I have to limit myself, so I just have 3 questions for the first and second and third spokesperson. The first question is, how can religious figured scientists elaborate to maintain a conducive political environmental ahead of election to ensure continuous economic growth? And that is for the first spokesperson. And the second question is for the second spokesperson. To what extent have science and scientists facilitated the emergence of global communication with the understanding that global resources are still abundant for an 11 billion population, thereby promoting the idea of sharing and preventing instances of genocide like we witnessed in Gaza today? And the last questions for the third spokesperson. Actually, I wonder what statement did your rector actually make that sparked controversy and debate? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 3 questions for Professor Santoso, for Paul, and then for France. Okay, the second one, who was the second person? Please stand before the mic.
Okay, good morning, Speaker. Thank you very much. This is my honorable that I can stand here. Okay, the first question is
name and affiliation, please.
Oh, okay, sorry. My name is Wisnu Priyambada Sidi, one of the student of Master of Art in Digital Transformation and Competitiveness. The first question is for Mr. Frank Whitson regarding with the ethics in science. And when we're talking about the science, we're talking about the Internet of Things. And if we're connecting with the toxic environment that recently bullying and also toxic environment not only happen in the real life, but also happen in the cyber life, such as like social media, Instagram, Twitter. If we see the Twitter, we can see there is so many extremely work that appear there. So in this question, how this ethic can reduce the toxic environment in virtual space? And also the second question is for regarding with international financial institution. I will focus in the capacity building. You said that international financial institutions have a program for capacity building. So actually, how many program that IFI have in make a program capacity building happen in Indonesia? And the second one is regarding the climate finance. How much money that loan can have already given to the Indonesian corporate for finance the climate finance? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. The third person, please. Name and affiliation.
Hello, good night, good morning. My name is Paul Segarra from the Focolare. My question starts with saying that I'm a bit intrigued also by the distinction in the title of ethics and accountability, which brings me to my question, which can be maybe directed towards Professor Hodges or Professor Wisgen. Am I saying that correctly? Yeah.
Wysen.
Wysen, sorry. Yeah. So actually, I always thought of ethics as a kind of an approach or a response, kind of like a preventive, kind of like a responsive society to acts that are destructive. But from what I've heard today, a lot of interesting, inputs from yourselves on the ethics, morality. But if at all, the question is, what benefit can society gain from integrating such agencies of accountability, such as remorse, remediation, forgiveness, reconciliation, things that a response to acts after the fact. What can we gain from integrating these into our ethical discourses or conversations, do you think? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Your question actually reminded me of Aristotle's quote on his work on Nicomachean Ethics, which is said that politics is really the realization of ethics in society. Yeah, so everything is ethical, everything is political in that sense. Okay, we have a number of questions, and we will first focus on Professor Santos's response. There may be 3 minutes at most.
Okay, I was not quite clear what the question is, but it seems that it asks about like ethical commitment of religious person in dealing with environment. Okay. Well, there has been an ethical analytics on the performance of the religious community, and there are various. But I would like to share you the PhD thesis that had been done ongoing, like when we talk about Muhammadiyah, for example. The cadre of Muhammadiyah itself, who studied at the Department of Political Science, figured out the kealfaan, the missing point on formulating and also acting on ethical commitment on the basis of religious teaching. But there are a lot of actualization at the small scale in some other community, like some pesantren in response to a celebration of 100 years of Nahdlatul Ulama, for example, start with the idea of fikih lingkungan. And this is a codification of religious norm in order to be articulated as a teaching and become codified as like guidance to act. But comprehensive studies on that national scale, I think there has been still scattered around. And what interesting me is that the way people understanding religion correlate with the way they relate with the ecology, with etc. But I think ethical commitment has been well articulated, but they are in a minor scale rather than responding to the climate crisis, for example. So already what they are doing related with their real problem. For example, in some pesantren there are movement in terms of managing waste, for example. But this is the problem in response to what happened and their surrounding, rather than going around with the global crisis and make a systematic challenge on that. But this is the minor observation I can share with you. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Paul Hedges.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and sort of perhaps combine, I think, two questions directed to me and sort of deal with them together. For a long time, there's been a big concern that studying ethics doesn't seem to make anybody more ethical. I mean, people have sort of done works on this. You can learn as many ethical theories as you want, and it makes no difference to how people behave in the world. We don't perhaps yet know how to make people more ethical, apart from, if you like, through interaction with other people and overcoming particular sort of prejudices, particular sort of biases, through sort of like intergroup interactions. Also, of course, there's nothing that sort of prevents, if you like, you talk about sort of scientists or experts. There's nothing that prevents sort of people with any expertise or any degree of sort of seniority from being sort of as unethical as anybody else. Many leadership positions, I mean, in academia and other sort of organizations, people who want to exploit power will look for those advantages, and, you know, and they will find ways to rise up within society, within politics, within anything else. So how do we deal with this? How do we sort of prevent sort of problems? I will not pretend to know how we should go around this. My concern, and it may seem perhaps sort of inadequate in relation to that, is towards the individual, that every individual has to come back and just simply sort of look into themselves to work through their own sort of position against their sort of surrounding sort of situation. And it may seem like a voice in the darkness sort of sometimes in a wider society, but I said at the moment I'm not sure what else we can do. But also, of course, I mean, if we are sort of optimistic, sometimes little sort of ripples will have an effect in different places. It takes one person to make a right decision that can have a huge effect in society. I know one time some recent papers came out that during the Cold War and the Cuban Missile crisis, one of the commanders of one of the Russian submarines believed he had the orders to fire the nuclear missiles. This hadn't actually been given, but he believed the orders had come through. And the captain of that submarine said, no, I'm not going to do this. It's going to kill too many people. I simply refuse to do this. So that personal sort of individual responsibility can sometimes have a massive effect on sort of what happens within the world. And so perhaps sort of the other part of this question about sort of forgiveness and sort of what else sort of can happen. Again, I think this sort of raises this question: if you have people who sort of acknowledge sort of the wrongs, if you have that sort of individual in the right sort of position, it will make a huge difference. And perhaps in a case like sort of the Catholic Church, we've seen sort of Pope Francis and the way he has approached things very different from sort of Benedict. And if you like, in terms of sort of healing, of course, the sexual abuse, the fact that he has spoken sort of more openly about this, acknowledging the wrongs that the church has committed over time, it is part of an individual sort of healing process. And of course, individuals are also parts of groups. So if I could bring individuals and groups and societies together, I said it may be, you know, I don't have a big answer to this, but if you like, these individual acts will sometimes have much bigger effects.
Thank you very much, Paul. Frans?
Concerning the first questions, we don't know. The statement was not made public. It was considered to be confidential. That makes those issues ambiguous. You know, once again, plagiarism I define. I can see an article or whatever. I can say, okay, this is plagiarism. In this case, we simply don't know. We only know that the rector made public that what he said was intended to be funny. That's the only thing we know. Once again, yeah, that makes those issues quite complicated to deal with. Second, the toxic environment in the cyberspace. Well, I did not deal with that. I dealt with the universities and the academic world. But I think that social media platforms have their accountability. they should control things, but here again, yeah, we have statements that are not illegal, might be undesirable or immoral. I mean, what do you remove? What don't you remove? I mean, very difficult to handle that. Moreover, there is the issue of freedom of speech. You know, I may express what I think, and if I'm afraid to make a statement about something, because possibly a person could be offensive, in what world do we live? So that is also an issue that we have to consider. We have also freedom of speech. Third, the question had several aspects. Let me just take out one aspect. You mentioned mediation and forgiveness. Of course, yeah, as believers, we think, yeah, we hope that people can forgive each other. In this case, that is what the committee wanted. They wanted the two parties to sit together, say, okay, this is what I wanted to say. Sorry, I did not intend to hurt you. But in this case, the party refused. You know, if you, yeah, mediation or forgiveness only works if both people have the will to forgive. Now, in this case, that was not possible, and so the committee decided, okay, yeah, warning is a proportional sanction that we can give. Of course, the person involved was not satisfied with that. I think that's enough for the three questions.
Thank you. Michael, do you have any response to any of the questions?
No?
All right. Okay. Dr. Lubis.
Terima kasih Pak Wisnu tadi yang bertanya ya. Okay, the question is on capability. Apa tadi itu Pak Wisnu mengenai capacity building ya? Yes, I think we did some when I was in ADB. We have at least twice capacity building on accountability mechanism to LSM, to NGOs. Just to understand how to make a complaint, how to to file a complaint, and working together. In the case of Citarum, NGO working with us on interviewing people and others. I think it was twice. But that's not only on when we talk about capacity building, it's not only on that aspect of accountability mechanism, but also on safeguard policies. For example, we have a few training on involuntary resettlement, how to deal with, for example, what's the most difficult thing is on compensation of market price and the impact of the relocation and others. We did that, and of course then with the consultant we also doing issues more technical on pollution, on biodiversity issue. Well, lately biodiversity issue is becoming my interest because Indonesia, probably especially Papua, where I worked there for almost 6 years, is the last paradise on biodiversity. So that is very pertinent issue to be discussed. How many loans that was given by ADB, for example? I could not recall it offhand, but I just Google it. I just Google on that aspect. For example, on 24th of November 2022, ADB gave about $500 million to Indonesia energy sector. That's part of it. Also on the issue of green energies and climate change. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to ask everyone to give a round of applause to all of the 5 speakers. Okay, thank you very much for your kind attention and participation. We now go to coffee break. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, respected speakers, paper presenters, and participants, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to end of the opening ceremony of the 12th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to extend once again our deep appreciation for your support and participation. We wish you enjoying the productive and fruitful discussion during all the sessions. We have 3 more main sessions, 2 special panels, and 16 parallel sessions until tomorrow. And also the committee also give announcement about 2 things. The first, outside, we have booth to display our publication. We kindly invite you to visit and to find interesting books. And also, at the same booth, there is a staff will be very happy to help you to proceed with the payment of the conference. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we can have a moment of break. Graduate school have provided coffee and snacks, so you can refresh your mind, recharge your energy before joining the parallel sessions. There will be 2 parallel sessions after the break. The first will start at 11:10 a.m. and the second will start at 1:30 p.m. after lunch. We will gather again in this room to join the main session 2 at 3:15 p.m. and at the same time, you can join the discussion on ICRS special panel with the theme, the impact of polarization mitigation on the promotion of social and environmental justice in room A, the 5th floor. So thank you.